What happens when a poor farmer dares to walk into a luxury horse ranch only to be mocked and humiliated? No one knew that behind his tired eyes was a 40-year-old promise to the love of his life. A promise tied to a silver-gray horse, a dying dream, and a ride that would shake an entire town. Stay until the end, because this true miracle will leave you breathless. The morning at Bluegrass Ridge felt like a held breath. A white mist folded over the paddocks, softening the fences into charcoal strokes, and the horses moved as silhouettes, quiet tides of muscle and breath. Trucks with out-of-state plates lined the long gravel drive. Men and women in polished boots and tailored denim spoke in confident tones about bloodlines and trophies, their laughter bright and easy, like coins flicked into a fountain. Henry Walker came on foot. He stepped from the shoulder of the road with the careful grace of someone who had learned to spare his knees. His flannel shirt, washed thin by years and weather, billowed at the cuffs. His hat brim had the weary curve of a hand that had shielded it from sun 1,000 times. Dust lifted from his boots with each step, small ghosts of the farm he had left at dawn. He paused at the gate, as if asking the place for permission, then slipped inside. One palm braced on the wood as though steadying himself against a current. He did not belong to the gleam of chrome or the sharp smell of leather polish. He belonged to fields where the grass grew stubborn and the wind said plain things. And yet he walked forward, because days had become precious, and because a promise is a kind of compass that does not quit. At the barn entrance, a woman behind a high desk scanned a tablet, her manicure a perfect moon of color. She glanced up, offered a sales smile that faltered into something less certain when it found his frayed collar. "Sir, can I help you?" she asked, the vowels crisp. Henry touched the brim of his hat. "Just hoping to look around, ma'am. We're hosting private showings this morning." Her gaze slipped to the tote slung over his shoulder, a canvas thing darkened at the corners. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, ma'am." He tried a small smile, the kind carved from a lifetime of making do. "Won't be a trouble. I won't touch a thing." Before she could answer, a young man swung through the side door carrying a saddle like a question mark. He wore a ranch vest with the Bluegrass Ridge crest stitched in gold and a name tag, Derek. He took in Henry with a glance that landed and stuck. "We can't have folks just wandering," he said, not unkindly but not gentle either. "Clients are in the south ring." "I don't aim to wander," Henry said. "Just a look." Another man strode up then, tall, pressed, the sort of posture that turns a walk into a verdict. "Problem?" he asked the desk, not Henry. The silver tie clip said management without needing to. The name tag confirmed it. "Mr. Thompson." "Sir is here without an appointment," the woman said. Thompson's eyes moved over Henry's boots, his shirt, the faint scuff on his belt buckle where a wedding band had rubbed for decades. His smile was professional and tight. "Bluegrass Ridge is a high-profile operation," he said. "We protect the experience for our clientele." He gestured toward the courtyard, toward the polished people, the cameras, the clipboards. "Do you understand?" "I do," Henry swallowed. The barn smelled like hay sweetened by time, like the leather of old saddles and the clean breath of animals. It was a smell that softened something inside him, that folded memory over memory until he almost forgot to feel embarrassed. "I won't be long." Thompson's smile thinned. "Sir, we're not a petting zoo." The words gathered a few glances and a thin, polite laugh from somewhere behind. Henry's hand tightened on his tote. He thought of turning back. He thought of the kitchen window this morning, the way the light had fallen across the table where Margaret kept her sketchbook, the open page with its careful strokes. He heard her voice as it had sounded before sunup. Light, but determined. "Henry, if there's a way, just once more." He looked past Thompson and saw the horse. In the nearest stall, the lights seemed to find that animal, as if the creature drew brightness the way wells draw water. A dapple gray, tall and clean, a river of motion even when standing still. The mane hung like a single brushstroke. The skin along the shoulder trembled when a fly tried its luck and found none. The horse turned its head, and one dark eye found Henry. He felt an answering flicker under his ribs, old as boyhood, old as the first time he'd leaned on a fence and felt the world grow suddenly larger. "I'd just like to see him up close," Henry said, quiet, because beauty asks for quiet. "Sir," Derek cut in, sliding between Henry and the stall. "This is Silver Comet." He's not on the floor to gawk at. He's 250,000 reasons to keep your distance. Henry blinked. The number meant the ridiculousness of it, the way a mountain means you are small. He wasn't here to bargain. He knew what he had and what he didn't. He was here because there are certain doors you stand in long enough that life opens them for you, or at least lets you look through. "I won't lay a finger," he said. "I know horses. I know how to stand where they forget you're even there." "Not today," Thompson said, already turning. "Mara, please escort—" "Mr. Thompson?" A different voice, lighter, careful, threaded into the air. A lanky kid with wind-reddened cheeks and a cowlick that had lost a fight with a hat stepped in from the side aisle, a halter looped over his arm. His name tag was crooked. "Ethan." "I can take care of this, sir." "I'll guide our guest out." Thompson nodded, relieved to be done with it. "Thank you, too, Henry. We appreciate your understanding." Henry lifted his hat again out of habit more than respect and turned. The barn lights hummed. Somewhere outside, the announcer in the south ring called a lot number as though singing a hymn. "Sir?" Ethan's voice now, beside him. "You forgot your bag." Henry looked down. His tote hung lighter on his shoulder than it should have. Panic pricked him. "Lord," he said, and then caught himself, the word just a breath. "Thank you, son." Ethan had the canvas bag in both hands, holding it as if it contained something that could bruise. He didn't hand it over right away. He had the open, unhidden curiosity of someone not yet trained out of it. "You came a long way on foot," he said. "From town?" "From our place," Henry answered, and the pronoun was a habit he couldn't break. He had left at first light while the crickets were handing the morning to the birds. "Not too far if you know the back roads." "You looking for work?" Ethan asked, then flushed, ashamed of the assumption. "Sorry, that's none of my—" "No harm in asking," Henry said, gentling it for the kid. "Not work. Just hoping." He reached for the bag. Ethan's fingers brushed his as he passed it over, and for a moment the kid felt the weight inside. A book. Hard bound by hand. A stack of papers made soft by touch. Something that clicked like a tin. "Sir?" Ethan tried again, voice lowered so the desk wouldn't hear. "If you tell me what you're hoping for, maybe I can point you right." Henry glanced past the boy to the stall. The gray had turned away, but kept one ear tipped toward them, listening with the half-attention of a creature that knows you're there without admitting it. "You ever stand in a church long after everyone's gone?" Henry said. "Not to pray for something big, just to listen for a small permission?" He shook his head, smiling at his own strangeness. "I came to look. To remember. To remember what?" Henry shifted the bag higher on his shoulder. "A promise," he said simply. The word hung between them, clean as a bell note. Ethan nodded without understanding, and somehow that felt kinder than questions. He walked Henry toward the gravel drive, keeping his body on the side nearest the clipping of hooves and the swing of trucks. He had been taught to move people gently, to steer rather than press. At the gate, Henry stopped. A breeze ran down the long hill, lifting the flags, and with it came the bright, grassy smell of morning and the darker, warmer breath of horses. He closed his eyes a moment. He imagined the sound of pencil on paper, the soft scuff-scuff Margaret made when she shaded the curve of a neck or the light on a muzzle. He imagined her at the kitchen table, a mug of tea cooling at her elbow, that small frown she wore when a line refused to lie down just right. "Sir," Ethan asked, "are you okay?" Henry opened his eyes. The horses beyond the barn were no longer silhouettes. The sun had reached them, and their coats had become fields of silver and bronze. He felt the day tip from maybe to must. There are times you accept the gate. There are times you lean. "I'm fine," he said, but the in-between trembled in his voice. "Thank you for walking me out." Ethan hesitated. He was new enough to the place to still believe rules might be suggestions if you found the right door to knock on. He looked back at the office where Mr. Thompson had disappeared, then at the south ring where money cantered in wide, pleased circles. He looked at the man beside him, who wore weariness like another layer of cloth, and also a kind of stubborn light. "If you wait by the oaks," he said, nodding toward a row of trees that shaded the fence line. "I get off in 20. I can bring you a coffee. Maybe we can talk." Henry studied him. The boy's eyes had that clear, unpracticed blue, like the sky before weather. Beneath the vest there was more heart than polish. "I won't say no to a coffee," Henry said. "I'll be right there." Ethan smiled, surprised at himself, then jogged back toward the barn, a colt finding his stride. Henry walked to the oaks and set his tote on the bench. He eased himself down, palms splayed against the worn wood, feeling the heat of old summers stored there. The mist had climbed into the trees and was thinning away, and the day stood revealed in 1,000 humble details. The click of a latch, the soft ring of a shoe on stone, the barn cat slipping through sunlight like smoke. From the bench, Henry could still see the gray in his stall if he turned a little. He did, only once, and then faced forward, because a promise is not something you stare at. It is something you carry. He opened the bag and touched the edge of the sketchbook, then pulled his hand back as if the paper might be tender. He rested his wrist across the canvas strap and let his mind go where it had been headed since dawn, to the porch with the peeling paint, to the wicker chair by the window, to the woman whose hands had drawn 100 horses in order to keep one dream breathing. Across the yard, Ethan emerged with 2 paper cups and a conflict he wore like a second vest. He took a breath, squared his shoulders, and turned not toward the office, not toward the ring, but toward the oaks. The morning changed, by something invisible then, as mornings do, when a story chooses its road. A crow called once from the fence post. A gelding in the nearest pasture answered with a toss of its head. Somewhere deep in the barn, the gray stamped one front hoof and settled again. Henry stayed very still, because sometimes stillness is how you arrive. He did not know the name of the horse or the man who owned it, or the way a young person's courage can catch like sparks. He only knew that he had come as far as a promise can walk a man, and that the rest of the distance would depend on kindness, a small thing that changes everything. Ethan reached the Oaks and handed him a cup. "Cream and sugar?" he asked, as if this were a normal morning in a normal place. "Thank you," Henry said, and when he closed his hands around the heat, he felt for the first time that day the world tilt gently toward possible. The noon light sharpened everything: the glass panes of the office, the shine of boots, the chrome trailers parked like monuments to wealth. Inside the barn, voices rose and fell in steady commerce, pedigrees recited like prayers, bids made with the lift of a chin. It was a place designed to make horses seem rarer than gold, and men seem greater for owning them. Henry Walker stepped from the shade of the oaks back into that brightness, because a promise had more pull than pride. Ethan walked at his side, balancing a paper cup in each hand, his vest still crooked, his expression an uneasy mix of defiance and hope. The coffee had cooled, but Henry held it anyway, grateful more for the gesture than the taste. "Just let me talk to Derek," Ethan murmured. "He'll listen if I—" "No need to stir the pot on my account," Henry said. His voice was low, even, but inside it carried the tremor of someone bracing for ridicule he'd known before. "I've seen the looks." And the looks came quickly. As Henry neared the main aisle again, the polished crowd shifted. Two women in sun hats leaned closer to each other, whispering, then laughing behind gloved fingers. A man in a sports jacket sniffed audibly, as though the very air Henry brought with him was beneath breathing. Derek appeared, leading Silver Comet by the halter. The horse moved like liquid steel, head high, coat bright as morning frost. The gathered clients murmured their admiration. Then Derek spotted Henry, his smile curled, sharp, and practiced. "Well, well," Derek said, loud enough for the ring of voices to catch. "Our friend's back." "Thought we'd cleared this up." Henry tipped his hat in that old gesture of respect, though the brim shook faintly in his hand. "Just admiring, son." "Won't bother a soul. Admiring?" Derek let out a laugh that snapped the air. "Sir, this isn't a county fair." "That horse costs more than your farm, I'd bet." The laughter rippled outward. Even Thompson, standing near the office with his tie gleaming, allowed himself the smallest smirk. Henry's ears burned red. He did not answer. Words seemed a thin shield against the weight of mockery. He only looked at the horse, at the proud slope of its neck, at the dark eye that flicked toward him as if in recognition. Silver Comet stamped once, impatient, and Henry's chest clenched with the memory of hooves on summer earth long ago, when dreams were new. "Derek," Ethan said suddenly, stepping between them. "That's enough." The barn fell quieter at the boldness. Derek raised a brow, amusement sharpening into disdain. "Careful, rookie. You're paid to handle tack, not charity cases." "I'm paid to treat people with decency," Ethan shot back. His cheeks flushed, but he held his ground. Thompson strode over then, his authority heavy as boots on gravel. "What's going on?" "Nothing," Derek said, lips curling. "Just reminding our guest this isn't the right pasture for him." Thompson's gaze cut to Henry. "Sir, I asked you earlier to leave. Now I must insist. We can't have scenes." Henry nodded slowly, shoulders heavy with the weight of dismissal. "I'll go." As he turned, his tote bumped the stall door, and something slipped from its mouth. A photograph fluttered down, face up on the straw. A young woman looked out from the faded print, her smile wide, her hand resting on the mane of a horse strikingly like Silver Comet. The likeness was uncanny. Same proud head, same light in the eye. Ethan bent quickly, lifting the photo before Derek's boot could crush it. He held it reverently, then looked at Henry. The older man's face had gone pale, the kind of pale that comes when the past is called into the present without warning. Thompson's impatience deepened. "Pick up your things and be on your way." But the photograph had changed something. A few clients craned their necks, curious now. The laughter dimmed. Even Derek's smugness faltered as his eyes flicked from the print to the horse before him. Henry took the photo gently, slid it back into his bag. He said nothing more. Words would have sounded like begging, and he would not beg. He tipped his hat once more, turned, and walked out into the sunlight. Behind him, the barn hummed with uneasy murmurs. Ethan stood frozen, torn between orders and conscience. His chest ached with the image of the photograph, the young woman's joy, the uncanny twin of Silver Comet beside her. Outside, Henry's boots found the gravel with a weary rhythm. He kept his head down, not to hide tears, but to bear the weight of dignity that cost more than pride. His shadow stretched long across the yard, thin as a thread, but unbroken. And though the laughter still echoed in the rafters, a different sound lingered louder in Ethan's mind. The silence after it, heavy and unsettled, as if everyone had seen more than they meant to. He hurried after Henry again, heart pounding, knowing that mockery had opened a door, one that would not close so easily now. The sun had slid higher, burning away the mist, until every blade of Kentucky grass shone sharp and green. Dust hung in the air like a curtain drawn by hooves. Henry Walker walked slowly along the gravel lane that led away from the barns, his tote clutched against his chest as if it were fragile cargo. His shoulders curved inward, as though the ridicule had bent him further than age already had. Each step felt heavy, not because of the miles, but because of the echo of laughter that clung to his ears. Behind him, Ethan Miller hesitated in the wide doorway of the barn. He should have turned back to his duties, polishing tack, sweeping aisles, fetching feed, but his feet ignored orders. Something in him, untrained and stubborn, refused to let the old man vanish down the road like an inconvenience swept aside. The photograph he'd glimpsed still burned in his mind, a young woman smiling beside a horse that looked like Silver Comet's twin. "Mr. Walker!" Ethan's voice broke the hum of cicadas. Henry paused, but didn't turn right away. He drew a breath, tightened his grip on the bag, then looked over his shoulder. The brim of his hat shadowed his face, but the eyes beneath were tired in a way that no rest could mend. Ethan jogged to catch up, breath uneven from nerves rather than effort. "Sir, wait. You forgot. Well, not forgot. But you left something behind. That picture, it meant something, didn't it?" Henry's fingers tightened on the tote. More than something. His voice was rough, not angry, but carved with restraint. "It's most of a life." They stood on the edge of the property, beyond the manicured lawns, where the gravel bled into clay road. The polished voices of the buyers and managers were only a murmur now, carried faintly by the breeze. Here, there was more honesty in the air, wild clover, hot dust, and the deep smell of pasture. Ethan shifted uneasily, then sat down on the wooden rail of the fence. They shouldn't have treated you like that, he said. It was cruel. Henry gave a tired shrug. Cruel's nothing new. Folks size you up by your boots before they know your name. He tipped his hat back a little, revealing lines etched by sun and years. But cruelty's not the whole of the world. Sometimes you find a hand reaching out instead of pushing away. Ethan flushed. When I saw that photo, I thought, maybe you weren't here for the same reason as the others. He hesitated, then asked softly, Why did you come, really? For a long moment, Henry didn't answer. He glanced toward the hills where the horizon rippled like heat waves, his lips pressed thin, as if weighing whether a boy barely 20 could be trusted with a secret carved into 40 years. Then, slowly, he lowered the tote to the ground, unbuckled the flap, and drew out the photograph again. He held it like a sacred relic. That's Margaret, he said. His thumb brushed the faded edge where time had eaten away color. My wife, back when her laugh filled whole fields. We met when we were younger than you, at a county fair. She stood by a stallion then, bright-eyed, and told me one day she'd have one of her own. I told her I'd make it happen, no matter how long it took. Ethan leaned forward, spellbound. And Silver Comet, he looks just like that horse in the photo. Henry nodded. That's why I came. To see if the years and the miles had kept the dream alive. Margaret can't travel anymore. Too weak. But she asked me once, not long ago, if the horse we had dreamed of still lived somewhere in this world. I promised I'd find out. His voice dropped to a rasp. I promised her the wind in her hair one last time. Silence stretched between them, weighted and tender. Ethan stared at the road, blinking hard. He thought of his own grandfather, long gone, who had taught him that horses carried more than riders. They carried hearts. Sir, Ethan said finally, let me help. Maybe I don't know how yet, but there's got to be a way. Henry studied the boy's earnest face. The freckles, the earnest blue eyes, the cowlick refusing to stay tamed. He saw sincerity untempered by cynicism, a kind of raw courage. You've got a good heart, Henry said quietly. But good hearts don't always win against high walls. Then maybe they climb, Ethan answered, surprising even himself. Henry chuckled softly, the sound like gravel shifting under tires. Maybe they do. He slipped the photo back into the tote. But it's not your burden. You've got your own roads to walk. Sometimes the road picks you, Ethan said, standing again. He offered his hand. My name's Ethan. If you'll trust me, I'd like to know more. About you, about her, about what this dream really means. Henry looked at the hand for a long time before taking it. His grip was calloused, but steady. Henry Walker, he said. And if you truly want to know, son, it's a long story. They stood together by the fence as the sun leaned westward, strangers no longer. The barn behind them glittered with wealth. But out here, beside dust and clover, something more valuable had begun. A thread of understanding. Fragile, yet strong enough to hold the weight of what was coming. The road that stretched from the ranch into the countryside was a patchwork of clay, gravel, and weeds pushing through cracks. Ethan followed Henry along it, carrying nothing but a restless urgency. He wasn't supposed to leave the grounds during work hours, but something larger than rules tugged him forward. Henry didn't protest. He seemed to know the boy needed to see for himself where the path led. They walked in companionable silence for a while. The cicadas sang their chorus from the trees, and every so often the breeze bent tall grass in waves like a green sea. Ethan's sneakers scuffed softly, quick and impatient. Henry's boots struck with slower weight, as though each step measured more than distance. Finally, Ethan asked, "Does your wife know you came here today?" Henry tilted his hat back. "She does. Told her I'd be late to supper. Didn't tell her why. Why not? Because disappointment can take more out of a person than sickness," Henry replied. His voice held no bitterness, only a worn honesty. "If I came home empty-handed, she'd know I tried, but she wouldn't have to carry the shame of being turned away." Ethan felt his throat tighten. He thought of the laughter in the barn, the smirk on Derek's face, the cold dismissal from Thompson. He imagined Margaret, this unseen woman Henry spoke of, waiting at a window, hopeful. "That's not shame on her," Ethan said fiercely. "That's on them." Henry's gaze softened. "Maybe. But she's carried enough. My job is to spare her what weight I can." The road bent and revealed a small house crouched against the slope of a hill. Its clapboard siding was weathered to the color of driftwood, but the porch was tidy, swept clean, and lined with clay pots of blooming geraniums. A faint trail of wood smoke drifted from the chimney, though the day was warm. Ethan's eyes caught on the details. Curtains sewn by hand, a rocking chair smoothed by years of use, the kind of place where every imperfection told a story. Henry slowed, touched the gate latch gently, as though the wood might bruise. "Here we are." Ethan followed him up the narrow path. As Henry opened the door, a voice called faintly from inside, warm, but thinned by illness. "Henry? That you?" "Yes, Maggie," he answered, and the change in his voice startled Ethan. It softened like cloth unraveling, every word soaked in tenderness. "I brought someone with me." The living room smelled of lavender and wood polish. Sunlight angled through lace curtains onto a worn rug. In a chair by the window sat Margaret Walker. She wore a shawl the color of faded sky, and though her face was pale, her eyes were startlingly alive. Bright pools that seemed to catch light and hold it. "This is Ethan," Henry introduced quietly. "He works at the ranch." Margaret smiled, though her lips trembled. "A visitor." "That's rare these days," Ethan, suddenly awkward, dipped his head. "Ma'am, it's an honor." Margaret studied him a moment, then turned her gaze back to Henry. "You've been gone a while. Did you find what you were looking for?" Henry's silence was its own answer. He set his tote on the table, unfastened the flap, and drew out the photograph. He placed it carefully in Margaret's lap. Her hands, thin and veined, traced the edges as though reacquainting themselves with the past. "Oh," she whispered, "that day at the county fair." Her eyes misted. "Do you remember, Henry? I told you he looked like a king. You laughed and said one day I'd ride beside a king." Henry's throat worked. "I remember." Ethan stood quietly, hands clasped, feeling like an intruder in a sacred place. Yet Margaret turned to him, and her gaze was steady. "He hasn't told you, has he?" About our promise, Ethan shook his head. She reached into the basket beside her chair and pulled out a notebook. Its cover was worn smooth, the corners bent, but when she opened it, Ethan saw page after page of sketches, horses drawn in pencil and charcoal, each different but all variations of one. A tall, proud animal with a silver-gray coat. "I draw one every day," Margaret said softly. "Some days it's all I have strength for. They keep the dream alive. We saved for years, Henry and I. We called it our riding fund. But then, she trailed off, her fingers lingering on one unfinished sketch. Henry took her hand, finishing the thought she could not. Then life asked more of us than money could answer. Margaret leaned her head back, closing her eyes. But the promise was never broken. Henry said he'd bring me the wind on my face one last time. And I believe him. Ethan swallowed hard. The weight of their words pressed on him. He looked at Henry, who stared at his wife with a mixture of devotion and sorrow so fierce it was almost unbearable. For the first time, Ethan understood. Henry hadn't come to the ranch chasing vanity. He'd come bearing a covenant decades old, one that illness and poverty had tried but failed to erase. The ridicule Henry had endured was nothing compared to the burden of fulfilling that vow. Margaret opened her eyes again and caught Ethan watching. "Do you ride, young man?" "Not much lately," Ethan admitted. "But I used to, with my granddad." "Then you know," she said, her voice light as breath. "A horse can carry more than weight. They carry souls." Ethan nodded, unable to speak. The room fell quiet, except for the faint tick of a clock. Outside, a meadowlark sang, its notes piercing and sweet. Ethan felt something shift in him, like a door opening. He needed to find a way to help. Margaret smiled faintly at Henry, then closed the notebook. "You'll keep your promise," she said. "I have no doubt." Henry kissed her hand, and in that moment, Ethan knew he was standing in the middle of a story that was far from over. The late afternoon light slanted low through the lace curtains, pouring a golden warmth over the modest room. Dust motes danced like tiny stars in the beams, caught in their slow orbit above the rug. Margaret had drifted into a light rest, her head tilted gently against the back of her chair, shawl gathered close. Henry sat beside her, his broad hand covering hers, his thumb moving in absent circles over her knuckles, as though reminding her of his presence, even in dreams. Ethan lingered near the window, restless, but reverent. His eyes kept straying to the notebook on the table where Margaret had left it, its spine cracked from years of opening and closing. Something about it pulled at him, not out of curiosity alone, but from the sense that within those pages lived the unspoken story of decades. Henry noticed. "Go on," he said quietly, nodding toward the book. "She wouldn't mind." Ethan hesitated, then stepped forward and opened it. The first page showed a horse drawn with surprising precision, the strong curve of the neck, the elegant line of the muzzle. It wasn't professional art, but it carried something rarer: devotion. Each stroke of pencil felt alive, as though it had been pressed onto the page with equal measures of hope and memory. He turned another page and another. Horses in motion, horses grazing. Horses looking out with dark eyes that seemed to hold a universe. Some sketches were hurried, lines trembling as if Margaret's hand had fought weakness that day. Others were detailed, careful, shaded with patience. All of them shared one feature. The coat of the horse was always pale, a shimmering gray, just like silver comet. "These are beautiful," Ethan whispered. Henry's eyes softened as he watched. Every day she could lift a pencil, she drew. When she was too tired, she asked me to describe what I remembered from the fairs we went to, from the horses we saw along the roads. She said drawing them kept her close to the dream, even when the world kept pushing it farther away. Ethan paused on one page where a horse reared, mane flowing, but the lines broke off halfway, unfinished. The bottom corner bore a faint stain, perhaps from tears or spilled tea. His throat tightened. She's been drawing the same horse for years. The same dream, Henry said. His voice carried both pride and sorrow. It started as something simple, a promise I made a long time ago. Back then, I thought I could buy her one before we were gray ourselves. We saved every penny, kept it in a wooden box. She called it our riding fund. We used to take it out some nights, count the bills, laugh about the names we'd give the horse one day. But when sickness came, the box emptied faster than it ever filled. Medicine costs what it costs. He exhaled heavily. I'd empty it again without a second thought, but it meant the dream had to wait. Ethan shut the sketchbook gently, his hands lingering on the cover. But you still believe you can keep the promise? Henry looked at Margaret sleeping peacefully, her chest rising and falling with fragile rhythm. I don't have the time to doubt, he said. She's held on for me, for us. Now it's my turn to hold on for her. The honesty in his words made Ethan's chest ache. He thought of the barns, the polished people, the cold laughter earlier. He thought of Thompson's dismissive smirk. For them, horses were trophies, status, lines on a ledger. For Margaret and Henry, a horse was something else entirely. A vessel for love, for dignity, for a lifetime of shared hope. The screen door creaked open, and a neighbor woman appeared, carrying a basket of muffins wrapped in a cloth. She greeted Henry kindly, asked after Margaret, then glanced at Ethan with polite curiosity. A friend of the family. Henry answered simply, a friend of the promise. The neighbor gave a nod that suggested she understood more than she let on. In small towns, stories traveled like wind. Everyone knew who had carried burdens quietly for decades. After she left, silence filled the house again, broken only by the tick of the clock and the whisper of the breeze against the window panes. Ethan shifted, unable to stay still. I can't just watch this, Mr. Walker. I have to do something. There has to be a way to make them listen, to see what this means. You deserve better than what they gave you today. Henry studied him for a long moment, his eyes weary but grateful. You've got the fire of youth. I had that once, but fire alone won't melt stone. That ranch, those men, they're stone. They see money, not hearts. Then maybe they just need someone to show them the difference? Ethan replied, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. Henry smiled faintly, as though he both admired and pitied the boy's determination. If you can do that, son, you'll have given her more than I ever could. Margaret stirred then, opening her eyes. She caught sight of the closed notebook and smiled. You've seen my pages, she said softly. They're nothing fancy. They're everything, Ethan said without hesitation. Her smile deepened. She reached for Henry's hand again, lacing her fingers with his. Do you see, Henry? The dream doesn't just live in us anymore. It's found another heart to rest in Henry bent to kiss her temple. I see. His voice broke on the words, and he turned away for a moment, pulling his hat low. Ethan looked between them and felt the weight of the sketchbook settle into him like a responsibility. He knew then that he couldn't go back to the barns and pretend nothing had changed. He would carry their story, because some promises were too sacred to be left unfinished. Morning came sharp and bright, the kind of day when the Kentucky sky seemed almost too wide to belong to this earth. Ethan's alarm buzzed before dawn, but he had hardly slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Margaret's notebook, page after page of silver-gray horses leaping out of the paper. Every time he tried to breathe, he heard Henry's words, "I don't have the time to doubt." By the time he walked into the ranch stables, the air was already alive with the snorts of restless horses, the scrape of hooves against stall floors, and the hum of men readying for the day's showings. Ethan pulled on his gloves, but his hands shook. He had decided he couldn't let things stand as they were. Derek spotted him near the tack room. "Rookie," he called with that smirk that made every word a jab. "You run off yesterday with our stray guest?" You know Thompson doesn't like distractions. Ethan swallowed hard but forced his voice steady. "That man wasn't a stray." "He's a client," Derek barked a laugh. "A client? The old farmer with boots older than me? He couldn't afford a saddle strap, let alone Silver Comet. Don't get soft, Miller. This is business." The words stung, but Ethan refused to let them sink in. "Not everything about horses is business," he muttered. Derek tilted his head, mock amusement sparking. "Maybe in storybooks, kid. But here, dollars talk and daydreamers walk." He clapped Ethan on the shoulder, not kindly, and strode off to greet a wealthy buyer stepping from a polished SUV. Ethan clenched his fists, his pulse thudding. He wanted to shout, to shake Derek until he saw the truth. Instead, he turned on his heel and marched toward the office, where Mr. Thompson sat behind his desk, his tie gleaming, papers stacked like bricks of authority. "Sir," Ethan began, standing tall though his knees trembled. "I need to speak with you about Henry Walker." Thompson looked up, irritation already shadowing his face. "The old man from yesterday?" "I thought we'd closed that matter." "He's not just some old man," Ethan pressed. "He and his wife have been saving for years. They—" "Enough!" Thompson's hand cut the air. "I don't run a charity. This ranch is about pedigree, reputation, and profit. Silver Comet is worth $250,000. Do you have any idea what that means for our sales numbers this quarter? Or for my career?" Ethan's cheeks burned. "It means you see numbers where you should see people." Thompson stood now, his height and authority casting a shadow across the desk. "Listen to me, Miller. You're an intern. You muck stalls and fetch water. You don't tell me how to run this operation. If you want a future here, keep your head down and your mouth shut." Ethan's breath came quick, but he didn't back down. "And if I don't? Then you'll find yourself unemployed before you even begin," Thompson said coldly. The office fell silent, but for the faint rustle of papers in the air conditioning. Ethan felt the weight of choice pressing on him. Security or conscience, a job or a promise he had adopted as his own. He thought of Margaret's trembling smile, of Henry's steady hand holding hers, of the sketchbook filled with silver-gray dreams. The decision made itself. "I'm not here for a career if it means forgetting what matters," Ethan said finally, his voice low but steady. Thompson's eyes narrowed. "Then you've chosen poorly." Ethan turned and walked out before the man could see the fear beneath his resolve. His heart thundered, but a strange relief spread through him too, like stepping into cold water after a long hesitation. Back in the aisle, Silver Comet lifted his head from the stall and looked straight at Ethan. The horse's gaze was steady, almost knowing. Ethan paused, then whispered, "I'll find a way. For them. For her." The horse snorted softly, as if acknowledging the vow. The rest of the day blurred with chores and orders barked at him, with Derek's taunts echoing in the rafters. But beneath it all, Ethan carried the silence of Thompson's dismissal like a brand. The wall of indifference at the ranch was tall and thick, built from greed and pride. Yet in his chest, he felt the stirrings of a ladder, something fragile but determined. When his shift ended, Ethan didn't go home. Instead, he walked the long road back toward Henry's house, the memory of Margaret's notebook pulling him forward. He knew the ranch wouldn't help. He knew Derek would mock him, Thompson would block him. But he also knew promises mattered, and Ethan Miller had decided he would not let this one die. Evening settled over Bluegrass Ridge like a velvet curtain, drawn slow across the sky. The last buyers had left in their sleek cars, trailers rattling behind them, carrying away horses that had been little more than numbers on invoices. The barns were quieter now, just the rustle of hay, the low rumble of horses breathing, the clink of buckets being filled. Ethan moved down the aisle with a wheelbarrow, his muscles aching, his mind still burning with the confrontation in Thompson's office. He stopped by Silver Comet's stall. The horse lifted his head, ears flicking forward, and Ethan reached out to brush a hand along the wood. "They don't see you for what you are," he murmured. "Not yet." Silver Comet exhaled warmly, the sound a soft huff that made Ethan's chest tighten with something like hope. A voice behind him startled him. "You talk to them as though they listen." Ethan turned. An older man stood near the end of the aisle, hat in his hands, shirt sleeves rolled up, boots dusty but well kept. His hair was silver, his face weathered, yet his eyes were sharp as flint, catching sunlight. Ethan had seen him before, though rarely. He wasn't like the trainers or buyers. This was someone different. "Mr. Green," Ethan said, straightening quickly. "Sir, sorry, I didn't hear you come in." Samuel Green, the true owner of Bluegrass Ridge, stepped forward with the quiet authority of someone who didn't need to raise his voice to be heard. "That's because you were listening too hard to yourself," he said mildly. He stopped in front of Silver Comet's stall, resting one hand on the door, his gaze lingering on the horse with something deeper than appraisal. Ethan hesitated. Few employees saw Mr. Green up close. Most of the time, Thompson spoke as if the ranch were his alone. But here was the man himself, and there was nothing polished or shallow about the way he looked at the animal. "You treat them different," Green said after a pause, his voice low. "Not like merchandise." Ethan swallowed, unsure how much to say. The memory of Thompson's warning still rang in his ears, but something about Samuel Green's presence loosened his fear. "Because they're not merchandise, sir. They're more than price tags. At least, to some people." Green's eyes flicked toward him. "To some?" Ethan nodded. "There's a man, Henry Walker. He came yesterday. They laughed at him, chased him out. But I saw the truth in his eyes, sir. He wasn't there to waste time. He was there because of a promise." The name stirred something in Green. Ethan noticed the faint twitch in his jaw, the way his grip on the stall door tightened. "Walker, you say?" "Yes, sir." Ethan lowered his voice, urgency rising. "His wife is ill. They saved all their lives for a horse, but life took that money away. Still, he came. For her. She draws horses every day, all of them like Silver Comet. It's the one dream she has left." The barn felt suddenly heavier, the silence pressing in. Green stepped closer to Silver Comet, his hand brushing the horse's mane, his gaze fixed far away, as though he were seeing another time. "I know that look," he said softly, more to himself than to Ethan. "A man who carries a promise." Ethan tilted his head, curious. "You've seen it before?" Green's eyes glimmered with memory. "I was that man once." The admission shocked Ethan into silence. Samuel Green rarely spoke of himself, and the workers whispered their own stories in his absence. Some claimed he was born rich, others said he built his empire from dust. But standing there, watching the way he touched Silver Comet with reverence, Ethan felt a deeper story stir beneath. Green finally turned, his gaze steady on Ethan. This isn't a tale to repeat in Thompson's office. He wouldn't understand. But you might. Come with me. Ethan followed him out of the barn, past the paddocks where the last light shimmered off dewy grass. They reached the old ranch house, its porch sagging slightly with age, its windows lit with a softer glow than the barn's. Inside, the walls held photographs yellowed with time. Horses mid-stride, ribbons pinned to frames, a younger Samuel standing proud beside a black stallion. Green pointed to one photograph in particular. A stallion as dark as midnight, its mane wild, its eyes bright with defiance. That was Shadow, he said. My first. I was a boy with nothing but a dream and a stubborn streak. Folks laughed at me, too, said I'd never make anything of myself. But that horse, he carried me through more than miles. He carried me through doubt. Ethan stared at the photo, then back at Silver Comet's memory still fresh in his mind. Silver Comet. He looks like he's Shadow's grandson, Green said quietly. And when I look at him, I don't see price or pedigree. I see the boy I was, clinging to hope when the world had none to spare. For a moment, the air thickened with something almost holy. Ethan felt his pulse race, as if he had stumbled into the heart of the story without meaning to. Henry's wife, Ethan said carefully. She's holding on to that same hope. Sir, I think this horse isn't just meant to be sold. I think he's meant to finish a promise. Green studied him for a long time, his eyes unreadable. Then he nodded once, decisive. Bring me to Henry Walker. The words landed with the weight of destiny. Ethan felt his breath leave him in a rush, relief and awe tangled together. Samuel Green turned back to the photograph of Shadow, his hand brushing the frame with a tenderness Ethan hadn't expected. Some promises, he murmured, are bigger than the men who make them. And in that instant, Ethan knew the wall of indifference he'd faced was not unbreakable after all. Somewhere behind the cold facade of the ranch, a hidden door had opened. And behind it stood the only man who had the power to turn ridicule into redemption. The night air outside the ranch house was cool, carrying the smell of hay and damp earth. But inside Samuel Green's study, the air was thick with memory. A single lamp burned low, its golden circle of light pooling across old wooden furniture. Ethan stood by the door, hesitant to breathe too loudly, while Samuel moved with deliberate care among the frames that lined the walls. Most of these boys here, Samuel said, gesturing at photographs of champions draped in garlands, came and went like storms. They dazzled the crowd, brought in money, and then vanished into other barns. But some... He stopped before a frame tucked away in the corner, one less polished than the rest. The photograph inside was black and white, edges curled, the glass faintly cracked. Some leave a mark you can't sell or replace. He lifted it down, brushing dust from its surface. The image showed a younger Samuel, lean and determined, standing beside a stallion so dark it seemed carved from shadow itself. The horse's mane flew wild in the captured moment, its eyes burning with an almost human fire. This was Shadow, Samuel said softly. My first real horse. I bought him with borrowed money and the sweat of 2 summers working every field job I could find. People told me I was a fool. But Shadow, He gave me a reason to prove them wrong. Ethan stepped closer, drawn to the defiant energy frozen in the picture. He looks like he knew he was meant for more. Samuel chuckled, the sound low and tinged with longing. He knew he was free, and I was just lucky he let me ride along. He set the frame on the desk, his fingers lingering on the edge. Silver Comet is his grandson. That same fire runs in his blood. That's why I keep him here, not for the buyers, not for Thompson's numbers, for memory. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. The pieces were aligning. Mr. Green, Henry's wife, Margaret, she showed me drawings she's made every day for years, all of them of a gray horse, not just any gray horse, but one that looks like Silver Comet. She never saw him, but it's as if she carried his image in her heart the way you've carried Shadow's. Samuel's gaze sharpened. Drawings? Ethan nodded. Pages and pages. Even when she was too weak, she still drew. She told me horses carry more than riders. They carry souls. And sir, I swear, the horse she's been drawing is him. It's Silver Comet. For a moment, the room was silent, but for the faint creak of the old ranch house settling. Samuel's eyes softened, his jaw tight. He turned back to the photograph of Shadow, and then opened the drawer, beneath his desk. From it, he pulled another picture. This one yellowed, edges frayed, taken at a state fair decades ago. In it, Shadow reared in the ring, mane flying, while the crowd blurred into a sea of astonishment. I made my name that day, Samuel said, almost to himself. One show, one horse, and everything changed. But what people forget is that before the ribbons and the money, it was just me and him, two stubborn creatures who had nothing but each other. He placed the photograph beside the one Ethan had described of Margaret's drawings, comparing the lines, the posture, the proud lift of the head. It's uncanny, he murmured. As if that woman drew from memory. She never lived. Ethan leaned forward, his voice trembling with urgency. That's why Henry came. Not for prestige, not for vanity, for love, for a promise he made to Margaret decades ago. Sir, you understand. You know what it means to stake your life on a horse, not for what it's worth in money, but for what it carries in spirit. Samuel sat heavily in the leather chair, the weight of years settling onto his shoulders. He looked at Ethan, at the earnestness in the boy's eyes, and for the first time in a long while, he allowed the walls of business and reputation to slip. I know exactly what it means, he admitted. His voice cracked slightly, the echo of an old wound. Because once, when I was young, I swore a promise too. Shadow and I were going to build a future for my family. But ambition got in the way, and I let the world measure him in dollars. I sold him to pay debts, and I never forgave myself. Not truly. That's why I built this ranch, to prove I hadn't failed. But the truth? I built it to quiet a ghost. Ethan felt goosebumps rise along his arms. Then maybe this is your chance, he said softly. Not just to help Henry, but to keep your own promise alive in a different way. Samuel looked down at the old photograph one last time before setting it aside. Maybe, he whispered. Maybe the past is asking me for one final redemption. The lamplight flickered, catching on the lines of his face, deep with age but lit now by something that had been buried for years. Resolve. He stood, turning to Ethan with sudden clarity. Bring Henry to me. And bring his wife. If they carry this dream, as you say, I need to see it with my own eyes. Ethan's heart surged with relief and awe. He nodded eagerly. "I'll do it, sir." "I'll bring them." Samuel placed the photograph of Shadow back on the wall, straightened it carefully, then rested his hand on the frame. "This time," he murmured, almost to the horse in the picture, "we'll finish the promise." And as Ethan left the study, the night seemed changed, charged with possibility, as if the old photograph had not only unlocked Samuel Green's memory, but also turned the tide of a story that had waited 40 years to be told. The following morning broke clear and sharp, the kind of Kentucky dawn that painted the hills in copper and silver. Mist curled low over the pastures, clinging to fence rails like ribbons. Ethan rose before the sun, restless with anticipation. His mind replayed Samuel Green's words again and again. "Bring Henry to me. And bring his wife." Those words had cracked the wall of indifference wide open, and Ethan felt the weight of carrying them. At the ranch, Thompson was already pacing outside the barns, his clipboard in hand, barking orders at workers setting up for another round of wealthy buyers. He spotted Ethan and frowned. "You're late." "I came early," Ethan answered, surprising himself with the firmness in his tone. "Mr. Green asked me to do something." The mention of the owner's name silenced Thompson for a beat, though his jaw clenched. "You report to me, Miller." "Don't let a casual chat with Mr. Green confuse you about where authority lies." But Ethan didn't argue. He just walked past, his heart pounding, knowing he had more important things to do than wrestle with Thompson's pride. He had a farmer and his wife waiting on hope. By noon, Ethan had reached Henry's modest house at the end of the clay road. The garden still bloomed with Margaret's careful hand, roses glowing against the weathered siding. Henry sat on the porch steps, his hat pulled low, whittling a piece of wood with slow, deliberate strokes. "You look like a man carrying news," Henry said without looking up. "I am," Ethan replied. He dropped onto the step beside him, the words rushing out before he lost courage. "Mr. Green knows. He knows about you and Margaret. He wants to meet you both." Henry's knife paused mid-cut. He lifted his head, and his eyes searched Ethan's face as if weighing truth against hope. "And what does a man like Samuel Green want with us?" "To see for himself," Ethan said. "To understand." He told me about his first horse, about Shadow. He said some promises are bigger than the men who make them. I think he sees your promise in that light." Henry exhaled slowly, setting down the knife. His weathered hand rubbed over his chin. "It's been a long road of closed doors, son. Hard to believe one might open." "Inside," Margaret called softly from her chair. "Henry? Who's here?" Henry rose and went to her, guiding her gently onto the porch. Margaret wore her faded shawl, her sketchbook balanced across her lap. Her face was paler than the day before, but her eyes still burned with that quiet fire. "It's Ethan," Henry said tenderly. "He says Mr. Green wants to meet us." Margaret blinked, then smiled faintly. "Samuel Green? The owner of that grand ranch?" "Yes, ma'am," Ethan said. "He asked me to bring you both. He wants to talk with you." Margaret's fingers tightened on her sketchbook. She opened it to a page she had drawn just last night. A horse mid-stride, mane flying, its coat shaded with silver-gray pencil strokes. "Henry," she whispered, showing it to him. "Do you see?" I dreamed of him again. Maybe this is what it means. Henry looked at her, and then at Ethan, torn between disbelief and yearning. Finally, he nodded. "We'll go." That evening, as the sun lowered, Henry hitched up their old truck, the paint faded, and engine coughing, but still willing. Margaret sat beside him, her shawl pulled tight, her sketchbook resting against her knees. Ethan followed in his own car, guiding them down the road toward Bluegrass Ridge. At the ranch, Thompson saw them arriving and stormed across the courtyard. "What is this?" he demanded. "Miller, what do you think you're doing, parading outsiders through here?" "This is a liability." Ethan stood tall, his voice ringing clearer than he expected. "Mr. Green asked for them," Thompson sputtered, caught off guard. Before he could retort, Samuel Green himself stepped out of the main barn, his presence quiet but commanding. He regarded Henry and Margaret with a look that silenced everyone. "They're not outsiders," he said firmly. "They're guests of mine." Thompson paled, retreating a step, his authority collapsing under the weight of Samuel's words. The workers who had gathered fell silent too, curiosity sparking in their eyes. Henry touched his hat. "Mr. Green." "Sir, I don't rightly know why you'd ask for us." Samuel stepped forward, his gaze locking on Margaret, who held her sketchbook close. "Because I've heard your story," he said gently, "and because I believe some horses aren't bred for the auction block. Some are born to fulfill promises." Margaret's eyes glistened. She opened the book and handed it to him with trembling hands. Samuel flipped through the pages slowly, each drawing pulling him deeper into the quiet devotion behind them. He stopped at one that looked almost identical to Shadow's photograph from his study. His throat tightened. "This," he whispered, "is not coincidence. This is destiny." The courtyard was utterly still, every worker and horse seeming to hold its breath. Samuel looked at Henry and Margaret again, his voice resonant now. "Tomorrow morning, I will bring Silver Comet to your home. He belongs with you, not because of money, but because your dream and his spirit were meant to meet." The words struck like thunder. Henry's breath caught. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. Ethan felt his chest swell with relief, so powerful it almost hurt. Even the workers who had once mocked Henry now looked on with wide, astonished eyes. Thompson opened his mouth as if to argue, but Samuel's glance cut him down. "This is not up for debate," the owner said. "I built this ranch on the back of a horse I once betrayed. I will not betray this one, nor the people who carry his dream." Henry reached for Margaret's hand, their fingers clasping tightly. She whispered through her tears, "Henry, it's real. After all these years, it's real." The courtyard erupted, not in laughter this time, but in reverent silence, the kind that comes when people realize they are witnessing something larger than themselves. And in that silence, Samuel Green had made his bold decision, one that would ripple far beyond the ranch's fences and into the heart of a promise 4 decades old. The morning came slow and golden, spreading across the Kentucky hills like honey poured from the sky. Dew glistened on every blade of grass, and the roses in Margaret's garden stood tall, jeweled with droplets. The air was sweet with the mingled scent of earth and blooms, the kind of morning that promised something sacred. Henry Walker sat on the porch steps, his hat low, whittling a piece of cedar without really seeing it. His ears strained for the rumble of a truck on the road, his heart balanced uneasily between disbelief and faith. Margaret sat in her chair by the window, her shawl wrapped snugly around her shoulders. Though her body was frail, her eyes followed every flicker of light outside, searching for what her heart already knew was coming. She had dressed carefully, combing her hair and pinning it back as she once did for church on Sundays. She held her sketchbook across her lap, fingers resting on the latest drawing of the silver-gray horse she had never touched. The silence broke at last, with the sound of tires crunching gravel. Henry lifted his head sharply, his knife falling to the porch floor. Down the lane, a white ranch truck appeared, sunlight glinting off its hood. Behind it trailed a horse trailer, simple but strong. The engine's growl rolled through the quiet morning, sending birds into flight from the fence posts. Margaret's breath hitched. "Henry," she whispered, rising from her chair with surprising strength. She moved slowly toward the porch, her hand steadying herself against the wall, but her eyes shone brighter than the sun itself. Henry hurried to her side, offering his arm. "Easy now, Maggie," he murmured, though his own voice trembled. The truck pulled up in front of the house, and from the cab stepped Samuel Green. He wasn't dressed in polished ranch clothes today. Instead, he wore an old denim shirt, sleeves rolled, boots scuffed from honest work. His silver hair caught the light, and his eyes carried a quiet reverence. Ethan hopped out from the passenger side, his youthful energy nearly bursting. Samuel tipped his hat as he approached. "Mr. Walker. Mrs. Walker." "Good morning." Henry's throat tightened. "Sir, I don't have words big enough for this." "You don't need them," Samuel said simply. He turned and opened the trailer door. The sound of hooves on the ramp echoed like drums. Out stepped Silver Comet, his coat shining like molten silver under the morning light. His mane flowed with every movement, and his dark eyes swept the yard before settling on Margaret. The horse stood tall and proud, yet, when he caught sight of her, he lowered his head slightly, as though recognizing the years of longing captured in her drawings. Margaret gasped, tears spilling unchecked down her cheeks. "Henry, it's him. It's truly him." Henry tightened his grip on her hand, both of them shaking with emotion. Samuel placed the reins into Henry's palm. "He's yours now," he said. "Not for money, not for show. For the promise you kept, even when the world tried to break it." Henry's chest heaved. He brushed a trembling hand down Silver Comet's neck, marveling at the silk of his coat. Then, with great care, he guided Margaret forward. Her steps were unsteady, but her spirit surged. She reached out, her fingertips brushing the horse's mane. Silver Comet stilled completely, as if he understood the holiness of the moment. Margaret's hand pressed more firmly, and she laughed through her tears. "He's warm, Henry. He's real. I can feel him." Ethan swallowed hard, blinking away his own tears. He had dreamed of this moment since Margaret first showed him her sketches, but even he hadn't imagined the sheer grace of it. The sight of her hand in the horse's mane was more powerful than anything money could buy. Margaret leaned against Henry, her voice barely more than a breath. "Do you see, Henry? Our dream, it waited for us." Samuel stood back, watching silently, his face lined with memory and redemption. He glanced at Ethan, nodding slightly, as though acknowledging the boy's courage had sparked this moment. The porch, the roses, the wide Kentucky sky, all of it seemed to hush around them, bowing to the sight of a woman touching the dream she had drawn for 40 years. Henry bent close to Margaret's ear. "Are you ready, Maggie?" Her answer came in a smile that carried both joy and fragility. "Yes, ready." And in that still morning, with neighbors beginning to gather quietly along the fence line, the Walkers' porch became the stage for something greater than wealth or reputation. It became the place where love, promises, and destiny finally converged, embodied in a woman's trembling hand, resting against the mane of a horse, born to fulfill her dream. The air around the Walker home seemed to hold its breath. Even the cicadas quieted, as if nature itself wanted no sound to disturb what was unfolding. Silver Comet stood at the foot of the porch, his silver coat gleaming against the morning light, while Margaret rested her trembling hand against his mane. For a long heartbeat, no one moved. It was as if time had bent in deference to the moment, 40 years collapsing into a single touch. Henry blinked against tears that blurred the edges of his vision. He could feel Margaret's fingers trembling as she clung to the horse's mane, her frail body drawing strength from the warmth beneath her palm. "You've held on to him for decades," he whispered, his voice breaking. "And now here he is." Margaret tilted her, head back, eyes shining wet and luminous. "Henry," she breathed, "he's exactly as I dreamed. Every line I drew, every shade of gray. He's real." Samuel Green, standing with his hat pressed to his chest, cleared his throat quietly. "Mrs. Walker," he said, his voice softer than Ethan had ever heard it. "This horse was never meant to belong to numbers or contracts. Some creatures are born to carry something greater." Margaret turned her gaze to Samuel, gratitude spilling from her like sunlight. "You've given me back a piece of my life," she said. "More than a gift, you've given me wings." Neighbors had begun to gather by the fence, drawn by the sight of the horse trailer and the shimmer of Silver Comet. They whispered among themselves, but their voices soon faded to silence as they saw Margaret, her hand steadying against the great animal. The sight humbled them. None of the gossip or judgments that had once floated through town mattered now. What they witnessed was beyond explanation. Ethan stepped closer, his heart pounding. "Mr. Walker," he said gently, "she should ride." Henry swallowed hard, his throat dry. He looked at Margaret, then back at the horse, uncertainty flickering across his face. "She's weak," he murmured. "I'm strong enough," Margaret said firmly, her eyes alive with a spark Ethan had never seen before. "Henry, I've waited my whole life for this." Samuel gave a single nod, stepping forward to take the reins. "He'll stand steady," he promised. "Comet knows." The horse did indeed seem to understand. He stood perfectly still, ears forward, his body relaxed as if he recognized the fragility of the woman before him. Henry, his hands trembling but sure, slipped one arm around Margaret's waist. Ethan moved to the other side, ready to help. Together, with infinite care, they lifted her onto Silver Comet's back. Margaret gasped as she settled into the saddle, her fingers gripping the reins. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but her smile was radiant. "Henry," she said, her voice shaking, "I can feel him. I can feel the ground beneath him, the strength in him. It's like flying already." Henry climbed up behind her, his arms circling protectively around her frail frame. For a moment, they sat still, the horse waiting, the air humming. Then Henry leaned forward and whispered, "Comet, take her gently." The horse began to move, slow at first, his hooves pressing soft rhythms into the earth. Margaret let out a sound halfway between a sob and a laugh. The neighbors at the fence clutched one another's hands, many wiping at their eyes. Ethan stood frozen, his chest so full it hurt. As Silver Comet carried them into the open field behind the house, Margaret lifted her arms wide, her shawl fluttering like wings. "Henry!" she cried, her voice carried on the breeze. "We're flying!" Henry held her close, his tears falling freely now. The horse's stride, lengthened, smooth and sure, carrying them in wide circles through the golden morning. Each lap seemed to erase another year of waiting, each breath of wind Another burden of sorrow. Samuel stood at the edge of the field, his eyes misted, memories of shadow alive again in the sight before him. He whispered to no one in particular. Some promises wait a lifetime, but when they come, they make every year worth it. Silver Comet moved with grace, his muscles flowing like water, his mane whipping in the wind. Margaret's laughter rang across the hills, pure and unbroken, a sound so full of joy that even the birds seemed to rise and join her. For that brief eternity, she was no longer frail, no longer confined. She was the young woman from the fair again, her heart unchained, her dream finally whole. Henry pressed his cheek against her hair, breathing in the scent of lavender from her shawl, anchoring the moment deep inside him. 40 years, Maggie, he whispered. 40 years for this. When at last Silver Comet slowed, returning toward the house, Margaret leaned back against Henry, her eyes closed, her smile peaceful. Worth every day, she murmured. The neighbors clapped softly, some openly weeping, their hearts captured by the miracle they had witnessed. Ethan brushed his sleeve across his damp face, his chest burning with pride that he had helped carry the story to this moment. Silver Comet halted, lowering his head as Henry and Ethan eased Margaret down carefully. Her feet touched the earth again, but her spirit still soared high above. She kissed Henry's cheek and whispered, "You kept your promise." And in that miraculous moment, time itself bowed, acknowledging a love and a dream that had survived the trials of decades, only to bloom brighter in the end. The afternoon had unfolded with a serenity that felt almost unreal. After Margaret's first ride, neighbors lingered along the fence line, whispering in awe, unwilling to leave the sight of dreams taking form before their eyes. Silver Comet grazed quietly in the yard, his coat still shimmering with the sheen of movement, while Margaret sat on the porch wrapped in her shawl, her face aglow with the radiance of a young bride. Henry hovered nearby, his hands always close, afraid that if he blinked, the moment might slip away. But Kentucky skies, so generous in their beauty, can turn swift and unforgiving. Clouds began to gather at the edge of the horizon, dark folds rolling in with silent determination. Ethan noticed first, his eyes flicking from the distant tree line back to Samuel, who stood with arms crossed near the barn. "Storm's coming," Ethan said softly. Samuel narrowed his eyes, the weight of years of ranching in his gaze. "A fast one." Henry helped Margaret to her feet, ready to usher her back inside. But she shook her head, gripping his hand with surprising strength. "Not yet, Henry," she pleaded. "Let me ride again." Just once more before them, rain. He hesitated, torn between fear and her burning desire. She met his eyes, and in them he saw the same fire that had drawn him to her decades ago at that fair. "Please," she whispered. Samuel stepped forward, laying a steadying hand on Henry's shoulder. "Comet will keep her safe," he said. "He's the kind that knows when to be gentle." And so Henry relented. With Ethan and Samuel helping, they lifted Margaret once again onto Silver Comet's back. This time, her laughter rose even before the horse moved, a sound defiant against the approaching thunder. The horse carried her into the field, Henry riding behind, his arms around her fragile frame. The air grew heavier with each stride, the scent of rain rushing in. Neighbors gasped as the first low rumble of thunder rolled across the hills. Still, Margaret's voice soared above it. "Faster, Henry! Let me feel the wind before the storm takes it!" Henry loosened the reins, and Silver Comet surged forward with controlled power, his hooves drumming against the earth in perfect rhythm with the rolling sky. Margaret's shawl streamed behind her like wings, her laughter carried by the wind. For a fleeting, glorious moment, she seemed to become one with the horse, one with the storm itself. The clouds broke open suddenly. Rain lashed down in fierce sheets, soaking riders and watchers alike. Gasps rose from the fence line, some neighbors urging Henry to turn back, but Margaret lifted her face to the sky, rain mingling with tears on her cheeks. She spread her arms wide, shouting through the downpour, "Henry, this is what I dreamed!" The wind, the rain, the horse beneath me. It's life. Henry tightened his embrace, his heart thundering as loudly as the sky. "Then hold on, Maggie," he cried. "Hold on!" Silver Comet did not falter. He carried them in powerful circles through the storm, each stride defiant, each motion a declaration that the dream would not be silenced by rain or time. Margaret's laughter turned to sobs of joy, her voice breaking but still triumphant. Ethan stood drenched by the fence, unable to move, tears streaming down his own face, though no one could tell in the torrent. Samuel beside him removed his hat, pressing it against his chest despite the rain. His voice was hoarse when he said, "I've seen champions win crowns, but I've never seen anything as mighty as this." At last, Henry guided Comet back toward the house. The storm raged around them, thunder cracking, rain striking like needles, but within the small circle of horse and riders there was a calm, a sacred space where love and promise shielded them. As Henry slid down, he caught Margaret in his arms. Her body was soaked, her shawl clinging to her, but her eyes glowed brighter than ever. "Henry," she whispered, her lips trembling with cold and elation, "you gave me the sky." He pressed his forehead to hers, rain running down their faces together. "And you gave me the reason." The neighbors, once anxious, stood in silent reverence now, realizing they had witnessed not just a ride, but a miracle stitched into stormlight. Ethan's heart felt as though it might burst. He knew he would carry this vision for the rest of his life. Silver Comet shook water from his mane, then lowered his head toward Margaret, as if bowing to her courage. Lightning flashed, illuminating the three of them, man, woman, horse, like a portrait etched into eternity. In the storm's fury, the fragile woman who had spent years confined to sketches and longing had ridden against the wind. For a moment, she was no longer ill, no longer bound by time. She was free, and her freedom had thundered louder than the storm itself. The storm passed as quickly as it had come, leaving the land washed clean and glistening. Clouds tore apart, revealing a sky streaked in violet and gold. The fields steamed softly, the scent of wet grass and earth rising like incense. Neighbors drifted away, still whispering about what they had seen, their faces etched with awe. By the porch, Henry wrapped Margaret in a dry quilt, his hands tender as he tucked it around her shoulders. Silver Comet grazed nearby, steam rising from his powerful body, raindrops still clinging like diamonds to his coat. Samuel Green stood apart, his boots sunk into the soft ground, his hat dripping with rain. He had watched it all, the laughter, the tears, the storm that had wrapped horse and riders in its fury. Now, as silence reclaimed the yard, something inside him stirred, something he had long buried under years of profit and pride. Ethan approached cautiously, his own clothes soaked through, his hair plastered to his forehead. "Sir," he said softly, "are you all right?" Samuel didn't answer immediately. His eyes were fixed on Margaret, who leaned into Henry's chest, her face lit with peace, even as her body trembled with exhaustion. "Do you know what I saw out there?" Samuel finally said, his voice low, rough. Ethan shook his head. "I saw myself," Samuel continued. "I saw the boy I used to be, clinging to a dream when the world said I had no right to it. Shadow carried me through hunger, through doubt, through the scorn of men who thought a poor farmhand could never rise. And what did I do when I had the chance? I sold him." His voice cracked, and he pressed a hand against his chest as though steadying a wound. "I told myself it was for survival, for a future. But the truth? I betrayed the very thing that had given me life." Ethan's heart ached at the confession. "You built all this, sir," he said carefully. "Bluegrass Ridge, the best horses in the state. You gave Shadow's line a legacy." Samuel turned sharply, his eyes burning. "And what good is legacy if it costs you your soul? All these barns, all these trophies, every night they remind me of what I lost. That horse trusted me, and I turned him into a transaction. I told myself I'd atone by building this place, but all I built were walls. Until today." He looked back at Margaret and Henry, his expression softening. "Today, I saw what I should have fought for all those years ago. Not wealth, not prestige, just the right to keep a promise." Ethan let the silence stretch, the words settling like rain into soil. He realized now why Samuel had reacted so strongly to Henry's story. It wasn't just empathy. It was recognition. Henry had lived the same struggle Samuel once faced, but he had chosen differently. He had kept his vow, despite poverty, despite years of sacrifice. Samuel stepped closer to the porch, his boots squelching in the mud. Henry looked up as the ranch owner approached, his arm still wrapped around Margaret. "She's all right," Henry said, his voice protective, almost defiant. "The rain didn't break her." Samuel's eyes glistened. "No, Mr. Walker. It healed her, at least for today. I've never seen such strength in frailty, such joy in the face of time. Your wife carries more power in her smile than any prize horse I've ever sold." Margaret lifted her head, her voice faint but steady. "And you, Mr. Green, you carry a burden. I can see it in your eyes. But burdens can become blessings if you let them." Samuel swallowed hard, unable to respond. The words pierced him deeper than any criticism ever had. He removed his hat and bowed slightly, not out of politeness, but out of reverence. "You've given me more than you know," he said hoarsely. Henry's brow furrowed. "Sir, I think it's you who's given us more." "No," Samuel insisted. "What I gave was simple. A horse, a decision long overdue. What you've given me is a second chance at redemption." Ethan stood nearby, watching the two men, one worn by years of labor, the other by years of success, and realizing they were more alike than they could ever admit. Both had carried promises. Both had known loss. The difference was that Henry had held fast, and Samuel had let go. Now fate had brought them together to mend what had been broken. The evening deepened, the sky painted with streaks of red and indigo. Samuel placed his hat back on his head, then turned to Ethan. "You were right, son. Not everything is business. Some things belong to the heart. Thank you for reminding me." Ethan flushed, unsure how to answer. "I just did what felt right." "And that's rarer than you think," Samuel said. He clapped a hand on Ethan's shoulder, a weight both firm and affirming. Don't lose that. As night settled, lanterns were lit on the porch. The soft glow bathed Margaret's face, illuminating her as though she were carved from light itself. Silver Comet grazed nearby, his silver coat glimmering faintly in the twilight. The world felt quieter, gentler, as if even the land understood the magnitude of what had passed. Samuel lingered a moment longer, then spoke once more, his words carrying the weight of both confession and resolution. Mr. Walker, Mrs. Walker, your love has awakened something I thought long dead. I cannot undo the mistakes I made with Shadow, but I can honor him by making sure his grandson fulfills the promise I once broke. Silver Comet is yours, now and forever. Henry's eyes filled with tears, and Margaret pressed her hands over her mouth, overcome. Ethan stood transfixed, knowing this night would live in his memory as long as he breathed. And Samuel Green, the man who had built an empire to bury his regret, walked away lighter than he had in decades, because for the first time, he felt forgiven. The night after the storm settled like a gentle quilt over the Kentucky hills. The world outside the Walkers' modest home smelled of rain-soaked earth and roses opening under the weight of lingering dew. Fireflies flickered along the garden fence, tiny lanterns weaving in and out of the darkness. Inside, the house carried a hush, broken only by the soft creak of rocking chairs and the occasional sound of Silver Comet moving in the yard, his steady breath audible through the open window. Margaret rested on the porch, wrapped in a thicker quilt now, her hair damp but brushed smooth. Her cheeks still carried the flush of the day's ride, a brightness that no storm could wash away. She held Henry's hand, her fingers frail yet firm, as though anchoring herself to the man who had kept a 40-year-old promise. Henry, still damp at the edges of his shirt, gazed at her as though seeing her for the first time all over again. "Maggie," he whispered, "I thought I'd lost the chance. Thought time would take it before I could give it to you." She smiled, her eyes reflecting the glow of the lantern. "Time can take many things, Henry. But it can't steal love, and it can't steal the kind of dream we built together." Samuel Green sat a little apart, his hat on his knee, his posture humbled. He had stayed, not out of obligation, but because something bound him to the house now, something deeper than business. Ethan leaned against the porch rail, listening with rapt attention, knowing he was being shaped by every word spoken. Margaret turned to Samuel. "You've carried your own shadow, haven't you?" Samuel nodded slowly, his voice quiet. "For years, ma'am. Longer than I'd admit. I thought wealth would ease it, but money only makes silence louder. Tonight, seeing you ride that horse, seeing your joy in the rain, I realized redemption doesn't come from what you build. It comes from what you give," tears shimmered in Margaret's eyes. "Then you've given me more than you know." Samuel's throat tightened, and he turned away, embarrassed by the emotion pressing against his composure. Ethan broke the silence, his voice thick. "Mrs. Walker, when you lifted your arms out there, it was like you became the sky. I've never seen anything so free." Margaret chuckled softly, a sound both fragile and full. "Then remember it, Ethan. Remember that freedom isn't measured by what you own. It's measured by the dreams you dare to keep alive." Henry squeezed her hand, his eyes moist. "That's what we wanted. Always. Just to keep it alive long enough to see it bloom." Samuel cleared his throat and leaned forward, speaking with deliberate care. "Silver Comet will stay here. With you." This is his home now. Not the barns, not the show rings. Here, with the people who see him as more than a pedigree. And when I'm gone, his line will remain in your care if you wish it." Henry blinked, overwhelmed. "Sir, that's more than we could ever—" "No," Samuel interrupted gently. "It's exactly what you deserve. I failed Shadow once, but I won't fail his grandson. And you two? You remind me of what promises are for. They're not about glory, they're about love, carried forward." Margaret's eyes filled again, but her smile remained radiant. "Then Comet will carry our love too, even after we're gone." Ethan leaned his elbows on the rail, staring at the horse in the yard. Silver Comet lifted his head, as though sensing the conversation, ears flicking, tail swishing lazily. The boy felt a weight shift in his own chest, an inheritance not of blood, but of belief. He whispered to himself, "I'll remember. I'll keep it." The lantern light glowed warmer as the night deepened. Henry leaned back in his chair, Margaret resting against his shoulder, the quilt wrapped around them both. Samuel sat silently, his hands clasped, his heart lighter than it had been in decades. Ethan remained awake long after the others quieted, watching the stars settle into the dark Kentucky sky, listening to the soft sounds of horse and garden and promise. And in that peace, one truth settled over them all. Dreams do not end when they are fulfilled. They take root in the hearts of those who witness them, carrying forward into tomorrows yet to come. Night unfolded gently over the Walker homestead, a velvet sky stitched with countless stars. The rain-washed air was cool and clean, carrying the faint perfume of Margaret's roses. Fireflies moved lazily among the fence posts, their golden sparks echoing the constellations above. The storm was gone, but its memory lingered in the scent of damp earth and the silence of neighbors who had returned to their homes, still speaking in hushed tones about what they had witnessed. On the porch, Henry and Margaret sat close together, wrapped in the same quilt, their rocking chairs creaking in quiet rhythm. Silver Comet grazed nearby, his silver-gray coat shimmering even in the starlight, as if he carried a piece of the heavens on his back. Ethan leaned against the porch rail, his head tilted toward the night sky, while Samuel Green stood at the edge of the yard, hat in hand, his figure tall and solemn beneath the constellations. Margaret broke the silence first, her voice soft but clear. "Do you hear that? Henry?" Henry tilted his head, listening. The night offered only the murmur of crickets and the occasional snort of Silver Comet. "What am I listening for, Maggie?" "The quiet," she whispered. "For so long, our dreams were filled with noise, worry, work, the clatter of bills and doctor visits. But tonight, it's quiet. That means the dream has settled. It's found its place." Henry kissed her hand, his lips brushing her cool skin. "It's found its place because of you. You never let it die, Maggie. Not once, even when I nearly did." She smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. "I only held on because I knew you would, too. That's what marriage is, isn't it? One holding on when the other is too tired." Ethan shifted uncomfortably, the intimacy of their words tugging at his heart. But Margaret caught his gaze and beckoned him closer. "Come here, Ethan." He obeyed, stepping into the lantern glow. She reached out, placing her thin hand over his. "You're part of this now. Don't think for a moment that you aren't. You carried our story when no one else would listen. You believed when others mocked. Promise me you'll carry that forward, for yourself, for others." Ethan's throat tightened. "I promise, ma'am. I'll never forget what I've seen here." Her smile widened, soft and satisfied. Good. Then the dream will live on, even when I'm gone. At those words, Henry closed his eyes, the pain of reality tightening his chest. But Margaret squeezed his hand reassuringly. Don't be afraid, Henry. Tonight gave me everything I ever wanted. The ride, the wind, the rain, the stars. I can rest knowing our promise was kept. Samuel stepped forward then, his boots crunching softly against the damp ground. He looked at Margaret with a gravity that few men carried honestly. Mrs. Ives Walker, you've given me something as well. You showed me that redemption doesn't come in barns or trophies. It comes in moments like tonight, when love outlives time. Margaret regarded him with quiet kindness. Then don't waste your second chance, Mr. Green. Let your ranch be more than business. Let it be a place where promises live. Samuel bowed his head, her words striking deeper than any sermon could. I will, he vowed. By Shadow's memory, by Comet's gift, I will. The porch fell silent again, the stars burning brighter overhead, as though the heavens themselves leaned down to listen. Silver Comet lifted his head from the grass, staring toward the sky with an almost reverent stillness. His breath misted faintly in the cool air, and in that moment he seemed less a horse than a sentinel of dreams, a guardian of vows fulfilled. Henry pulled Margaret closer, his voice breaking as he whispered into her hair. Rest easy, Maggie. Whatever comes tomorrow, tonight is ours, and nothing can take it from us. Her reply was a sigh, content and full, her head resting against his shoulder. Then I'll go to sleep happy, Henry. Happier than I ever dreamed. Ethan turned his face toward the stars, silently repeating his promise, while Samuel stood in the yard, his own heart strangely light, as though an old wound had finally closed. The house, the porch, the roses, the horse. Everything seemed gathered beneath the vast sky in a harmony that felt eternal. And as the fireflies drifted higher, mingling with the constellations, it was clear to all who witnessed it. The dream had not only been fulfilled, it had been given wings to live on, under the stars, in the hearts of those who had carried it, and in the timeless bond between a man, a woman, and the horse that kept their promise alive. And now it's your turn. If this story touched your heart, drop a simple comment below. Type 0 if it made you cry, or 1 if it gave you hope. Don't forget to hit subscribe, because we have more true stories of love, dreams, and the unbreakable bond between humans and animals waiting for you. Stay with us for the next miracle.